Hello and welcome. COVID-19 has disrupted every business across the planet. Some will have found their continuity plans to be more robust than others. In financial services, everything is built upon compliance and process, so it doesn't take very long for things to start to unwind. I'm Padraig Floyd, contributing editor to Insurance Investor, and today I'm talking to John Stanton, a director at Clearsight Consulting, about how businesses can and should take control of their processes in order to improve operational and risk controls. Right, digital transformation is a key focus of all financial services entities these days, but to what extent are they ready for this transformation?
I suspect many are not as ready as they think they are. And the question I'd ask is, do they really understand that process that they're trying to improve, automate? Do they really understand how that works today? And let's be really clear here. This is how the process really works. And there's a big difference between how the process actually works today, how people are really doing it, versus how managers, directors, more senior levels think it works or would like it to work. And it's rare that those three things align. There's often big differences between the way it is done and the way they'd like it done. And often that's because the as-is process, as we call it, contains workarounds, things that people have introduced to the process to keep a client happy, producing a report in a different format. It could be even there's missing steps that people assumed were being done, but just for whatever reason aren't anymore. And if you don't understand how it's really being done today, you can automate the wrong thing. You're going to focus on the wrong view of the process. And that means post-project delivery, those workarounds, doing that report in a different format for somebody, they're still going to be there. People focus on the process how they want it to be, not how it is. And therefore, we see a lot of failure going on there. So it's really key that you understand that right process and get it right before you automate it. Do your improvement up front, because an automated bad process is still a bad process.
So are you saying then that many businesses aren't aware of the processes they operate, or even in some cases aware of some of the very small tasks that are going on within the organisation?
I don't doubt that most, if not all, organisations know what the processes are. My question is over whether they know how those processes are performed. That's the difference. It's the difference between having a library of processes, saying this is what we do, and that next level of saying how do we do it. It's that one that I'm not sure they have the proper understanding around. But in an organisation, if they don't have anything formal in place for managing processes, it's kind of that, you don't know what you don't know. Why would they be looking at this?
So why is it these things have been allowed to slide? Why is it so important?
So I think we need to be careful there, because to me, when we're suggesting something's been allowed to slide, it suggests that at some point processes were documented and understood and controlled. But I'm not sure that's always actually the case. But if nothing is going wrong, why would people look at the way they work? Why would they get into the detail of how those processes are performed? It works, right? So let's not worry about it. But the majority of our client engagements are based off a problem they need to address. Unfortunately for us, no one really wakes up in the morning and says, it'd be great to process map our business. It just doesn't tend to happen. But the importance of it is, by documenting and understanding your critical processes, it enables organizations to be much more agile in how they identify and deal with things like risks, costs, control points, things such as training, regulatory control. But you've got your blueprint at that point. So I don't think it's so much about things being allowed to slide. It's much more about why they just didn't have these things in the first place. And our approach is, you need to have this as your basis. Everything works off of your process. They're the heartbeat of your organisation.
Okay, but how dangerous is it if somebody does something small incorrectly, such as attaching a paperclip to the wrong part of a document?
There's probably two elements to pick up there. Obviously you've picked up, I guess, an extreme example, but often in process, the devil really is in the detail. So pushing the paperclip aside for the moment, I'd say it's risky for elements of a process or procedure simply to be overlooked or removed. Again, coming back to the paperclip, presumably if that's in a procedure or a process, it was added for a reason. And while the person affixing it might not see the point, could be, hopefully likely, there's a reason in the downstream flow where that becomes quite critical. And that's why arbitrary changes to a process can be so damaging. You don't understand what that downstream impact is. You don't always know what the external impact is of making a change. So it also highlights why documenting your processes and making them accessible to everyone had such a whole lot of value. So it helps to break down silo working. So if we've got someone producing a widget, we'll call it, they might really see a process at the moment in their own world. This is what I do with it. Actually, if they have access to the whole of that process end to end, they can start to see what happens to that widget once they've produced it. What does the next team do? Then they get a much better understanding of the process as a whole and understand the impact of the changes they might make. Something that might seem innocuous to them, a bit pointless. Actually, when they see the bigger process, they might have that light bulb moment. They say, okay, now I get why this is important. I think the second point is people sometimes, again, paperclip seems quite a minor thing. And if you start talking about you must not remove the paperclip, you must do things this way, people see process control as stifling innovation in a business, but it really shouldn't be the case. If you do it correctly, so you control your processes in the right manner and engage people in that, I'd actually argue it should open up the opportunity for ideas. It's the difference between having an idea and just changing the process off your own back. But in a controlled environment, people still have the ideas. People should be encouraged to have the ideas, but it's the way they're implemented is different. They're introduced in a controlled manner, they're assessed, and then they're implemented in a controlled manner. It's not just, winging it, for want of a better expression.
Okay, the paperclip point was facetious, but from what you're saying, it suggests that something as small as that is a bit like the butterfly's wings could cause a tsunami on the other side of the planet. It's a very small component could lead to a major error further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that whole working in the dark a little bit that causes the problems. If you don't understand why you're doing something, and that's what this is all about, understanding why things are being done, understand how they're done, how can you know what the impact's going to be? Removing a small piece of the process that you think is a waste of time or you think you can save time could have some regulatory impact. There might be a reason why a certain check is in place. Fair enough, it might rarely pick up an issue, but it's there for a reason. And you just need to be very careful about changing processes if you don't understand the bigger picture. Because you're right, it can have a huge knock-on effect to things that seemingly unconnected.
Can you give us some insights into the areas of insurance and asset management that you think might need to improve their game?
Yeah, sure. I think the first one perhaps isn't even completely specific to insurance and asset management. It's every business can have a unique set of challenges. But if we take a bit of a step back here and try and look at the bigger picture, I think there's a couple of areas that businesses can look at. The first one is around COVID. I think people need to be questioning what has changed in their organisation or department. We're a long way into the whole COVID situation, but I still get the feeling there's an element of seems to be working, must be okay. If it is, then great. But my question is that sustainable? What happens when we go back to a more normal way of working? What parts of the way you work today will stay? Which parts need to go back to the old way of working? I imagine there's lots of lessons learned from this as well. How are you going to implement those into your process? How do you make your business better on the back of all that we've been through? Unless you find a way of bringing that all together and really focusing it, it's going to be quite hard to do. And I think you're going to find people are caught between two ways of working. And I think that's where you're going to get some risks. I think the other thing we see quite a bit, and this is much more applicable to regulated industries, is around what you do when something goes wrong. Organizations really need to understand where the control points are in their business and have clearly defined escalation process for when breaches occur. When we go into organization, we map things around the regulatory sensitive processes. We sometimes find they've got quite a blunt approach in place. So we have seen things, let's say, within procedure documents that say something like escalate issue to relevant person. Well, what's an issue? When is it an issue? Who's the relevant person in this case? Is it the same relevant person regardless of the issue? It needs to be much more nuanced than that. You need to understand what your control point is, what you're looking for, and all the different escalations that can take place off the back of that. And if you want to manage your operational risk effectively, you really need to be on top of that and understand where in your process it impacts. Because once you start understanding that, not only do you understand where the control points are and what you do off the back of them, you get a very quick view of your organizational business and find out where the control points aren't in place. So we produce heat maps for clients to show the volume and nature of control points that are in their business. And sometimes it's quite surprising that you have one area where you might not have expected to see lots of them is overwhelmed with control points, and perhaps to the point that it's almost paralyzing them. But we also see other areas of business where you'd expect to see heavy controls, which seems to be quite light. So it gives a good indication of where you need to start looking. But again, those controls are fairly worthless if you don't have the right processes in place as to what you do when there's a breach. So they're the couple of areas I think organizations would do well to focus on at the moment.